Today I'm going to be painting this little river scene with the snow and a bunch of pine trees. It's quite a simple composition, so hopefully it won't give me too much trouble, but rivers are always quite hard. It's got some nice reflections of the sky in there. They're not quite the right color in the reference, but that doesn't really matter. I think I'll do okay with most of it, but the river might cause me some problems. So I've already started here, and I'm using the freehand color fill in Procreate like I usually do to map out the big shapes. I'm not too careful about where they go, just a rough idea. And I don't like to sketch it out really, because I find that more difficult than just whacking in these big shapes. So what I'm trying to look for here is obviously the big shapes like I just said, but what I'm trying to find is the darkest color in the shape itself. So when I lighten it, which is going to come in like phase 2, you're going to see why it has to be dark. If it's too light, it's going to be a problem. So I've got the dark, all the dark parts in here, and some of the details. I put some of those little tree tops in there, but they're not that significant. So now I'm on to the snow. So snow is always difficult. I'm not sure why exactly, but I mean, it's difficult for me anyway. So what I do is, so the shadow part of snow is always, well, not always, but a general good rule is like it's blue. So rather than try and paint the snow in first, try and paint the shadow in first. So, and then you'll have a good shout. So I'm blasting in some of these rocks here. One thing to notice, I don't copy the reference that much, maybe some of the big rocks, and then I just do whatever, because it'll be too difficult to copy. So what I did earlier to put the snow, rather than paint snow, I paint the shadow of the snow first, and then when I paint the snow on top, it's going to give me like shadows for free. Right, so I'm onto the snow, and these rocks, you gotta think about them like kind of like cupcakes or something. We need to put the snow on top of them, and make sure we leave some of that blue behind, which is the shadow. It's very important that you don't cover up that blue. Like, you can cover up some of it, but not all of it. So I've decided to jump back to the mountain there. So I don't like having too many flat shapes hanging around for too long. So I'll jump around and make sure I get lots of detail in areas, so it stays consistent. The trees are not such a big deal because they're so dark it doesn't really matter, but the mountain was bothering me. So again, it's the same kind of concept. I'm lighting it layer by layer. So there's only 2 or 3 layers, and I don't go much above that. And so we're on to detailing the trees, sorry. And how I do that is, because I made the big shapes earlier, really what I've got to do is take away stuff mostly. So I'm using the technical pen, the only brush I use, and then I'm swapping between adding and subtracting just to make a nice treetop shape. I'm not too careful. I'm not looking at the reference or anything. It's just make a nice shape. So I'm trying to do the river now. This is probably make it or break it time for this painting, because the river reflection thing is very important to this painting, and it's quite clear, well, to me, is that the color of the river itself, the reflections at least, are kind of going to the green a little bit. I think I've probably gone maybe a little bit too far, and I'll adjust that later. But I'm using Gaussian blur to make a gradient in Procreate, and that's kind of the only way to make nice gradients, unless you want to airbrush. And I generally don't use the airbrushes anymore, because the Gaussian blur is quite nice. So I'm not trying to copy the reference when it comes to water, because water is so complicated that to copy a reference would be very difficult. So there's a couple of concepts you want to know, and then that's kind of what I do for all water. Especially this. Keep in mind this water in particular is not moving very fast, so that's a different style. It's very still. So basically what you want to do is wherever there's a rock is make sure there's a shadow underneath it, and that goes into the water. So you can see me doing it now. I just use the technical pen and I'm going to smudge this. So because the rocks are in the water and sitting underneath the water, they're going to make a shadow underneath. So what I do is I paint some dark under the rocks, and then I get the smudge tool and I push it down. And sometimes the smudge tool pushes it too much out of the way, so I got to do it again. So that's why you'll see me do it again. So the smudge tool removes quite a lot of what you've done. So sometimes I'll do this several times. You don't have to be that neat with the color because you're going to smudge it anyway. So you can kind of scribble it in. But you'll start to see, the shadows making a much more sense. So I'm not watching the reference anymore because I know I just need dark under the rocks, push it down, and it's going to kind of make sense. So that's what I try to do. And like I said, now and again, when you pull down, it will put the bluey greeny color back. Now you don't want that, so make sure you make it quite dark underneath the rocks, and you'll be good. So I try to put the environment into the water too, and that kind of makes it all come together. So I'm taking the kind of the browny gray color from the sides of the banks and putting it into the water. And you notice I probably got a little bit too orangey on the left. Hopefully I fixed that. Can't quite remember. But what I like to do with the water, though, is experiment to see what colors I can put in it, and not look at the reference too much because it's just too difficult to understand what water does, I think. So what I'm trying to say is like find a way that water works for you rather than copying the reference, because there's like a billion things going into water, so we can't do that. So I'm going back to the snow and the banks and all that kind of stuff, and basically what I'm doing now is trying to put in detail. There's lots of detail on the banks and the rocks and all that kind of stuff, so I'm just using the technical pen again just to make it busier. I don't want it too busy, but it can't be kind of blank either. So I generally don't leave any big area of the painting blank. So I'll always put detail there somewhere. Simple detail, but just enough to imply that there's something going on. And one important part about this painting is these big ones up the front, these big rocks up the front are reflecting the water. So it might sound complicated, but basically all I've done is color pick the water and put it into the shadow side of the rocks. I mean, that's really all it is to it. I mean, it looks like this. Okay, that's kind of cool, but that must be complicated. Not really. You just take the ambient color from the water and put it in. But make sure, I know I blasted through that fairly quickly. When you do that, just make sure the opacity of your color is lower, because when something reflects something, it doesn't reflect it as sharp as it actually would with the actual color wherever it exists. So it kind of diminishes as it reflects somewhere else. So just put the opacity down, so like halfway or lower, because once the opacity is low, we can just go over the other layer over and over and over. I mean, if it's 50 opacity, you go over it twice, it's going to end up being the same color, for example. But, who gives a crap about math, right? We don't want that. So I'm back onto these trees. Now, I've left these quite late. I generally leave the trees late because trees are really dark, and especially pine trees. So adding a bunch of detail is not going to make a huge difference. You could almost leave them pretty much dark and it wouldn't matter that much. So I leave them to the end. I still you know, they're still important. You still need some texture in there to imply they're trees. And I'm using the technical brush again and a mixture of the color fill tool if it's big shapes. But try not to make them too bright. I've made this mistake many times, is I see a highlight somewhere and I think, oh, that needs to be very bright. And that's quite not the case. Highlights are relative to whatever you're painting. And what I mean by that is trees are generally dark. Pine trees are dark. If there's not like bright light shining on them, they're basically black. And if you look outside next time, if you see some pine trees, unless it's in crazy sun, they're very dark. And so just leave them dark, and it doesn't really make... Well, I mean, it's going to look better because that's exactly what they are. But the difference in this painting, though, is because we're doing snow. Snow is a little bit difficult because it is actually really bright. Now, keep in mind, though, obviously I'm not really showing you the colors I picked or whatever, but you can see my palette up in the top right, and you don't see white there. So even though my snow looks white, it's not white. It's a very bright blue. So stay away from black, stay away from white, because they're too pure and that doesn't really happen in real life. So look at the palette there, you can screenshot that or whatever and have a look at the colors. I can talk about colors some other time, but basically I stay away from very strong anything. Even though my paintings are vibrant and look colorful, I'm still very wary about going too bright. So we've got the color wheel and the color picker and stuff. And even though my colors look saturated, they could go a lot more saturated. And you don't want to do that because it just goes a bit crazy. I mean, they're like spray can colors, and it's hard to get away with that. So now I'm just fiddling around. I sped this up, speeded, whatever. And I'm fiddling around with the layers, merging them, checking the colors, messing around with the saturation and the brightness and all that kind of stuff, but not doing anything major at this point. The painting's basically done. So hopefully this was useful for you. If it was, give me a like and sub. Check out the other paintings. This is a series of 100 and this is number 19. So there's another 18, pretty much exactly how I am doing this one right now, explaining what I'm doing. So I'll catch you in the next one. Thanks.